Brilliant. We'll give everybody a couple of minutes to join. So good morning or good afternoon, everybody, wherever you may be, and a very warm welcome. Just going to allow a few more people to join before we officially kick off. I don't want anyone to miss anything that we're going to be talking about today. Okay, I can see people coming in. So I am going to get started because I'm conscious of time and I know that we've got a lot to get through. So as I said, good morning and good afternoon to everyone, and a very warm welcome. Thank you for joining us today. For this really exciting webinar, we are joined by Dr. Christian Schmeichel, who's Senior Vice President and Chief Future of Work Officer at SAP. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Nikki and I'm Global Head of Content and Solutions at Tiger Hall. And today we're going to be talking to Christian about transforming into the future of work, and more specifically about the leading edge people practices that will be needed for our workplaces in the future. So a really interesting and important topic for all of us here. First of all, we will hear from Christian about the changes that have and are impacting organizations across the globe, and hear his thoughts and insights on some of the more practical approaches that we can take to prepare for them. After that, I'm actually really looking forward to diving deeper into the promising possibilities of AI when it comes to people practices and how we can use it to create engaging workplaces, particularly for our multi-generational workforces today. And we're going to make sure we leave some time at the end for your questions. So please do put those in the Q&A box. You'll find that at the bottom of your screens. And please also do use the chat function to share any thoughts, comments, questions that you have as well. I'll put your questions and comments to Christian as we go and when relevant, but I will also make sure that we have time at the end for some as well. Before I dive into the formal introductions, just for those of you that are new to the Executive Council for Leading Change, as this is an open webinar, and I also know we've got some new members joining us, just sort of to reiterate, the ECLC is a global council and peer network for senior change leaders who are leading transformations in large organizations. So we currently have, I think, just over 250 members, located across the US, Europe, and Asia. And we get together weekly, monthly, and on these sort of live podcast recordings to discuss the challenges and best practices that we're all sort of coming up against and going through every day, as well as to exchange ideas and insights on topics, including things like addressing internal resistance, coping with change fatigue, getting that key executive buy-in, and anything else that is relevant when you're driving large transformations at scale. And the ECLC is backed by Tiger Hall, which I'm the head of content and solutions for. And Tiger Hall is a knowledge infrastructure and change engagement platform, which is here to enable business leaders to drive change with their organizations and not against it, on the premise that it ensures increased buy-in, support, and speed of execution for those transformation initiatives. So today we're joined by Christian, and we're delighted to have you here, Christian. Thank you very much for joining us. Christian is, as I said, Senior Vice President and Chief Future of Work Officer at SAP. So he's leading the Global Future of Work organization at SAP and is responsible for the Future of Work agenda, or the holistic Future of Work agenda across the globe. So you focus on the state-of-the-art people practices, your innovative workplace approaches, and that's for, I think, over 100,000 employees, I think I'm right in saying, all over the world. Christian has held various senior executive positions, including Chief Operating Officer for SAP's Global People Function, Global Head of HR Strategy, and HR Director at SAP's subsidiary in Japan as well. So I'm going to, well, first of all, a very big welcome to you, Christian. Thank you so much for joining us. And I'm going to hand over to you to kick us off.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Nikki, and also very warm welcome from my side. A true pleasure to be here today and to share with you a little bit what we are thinking about when we talk about the future of work. And the future of work is certainly a very exciting topic. And also, yeah, you just mentioned I'm having a very interesting and exciting role being Chief Future of Work Officer for our global and very diverse workforce of more than 100,000 people across the globe at SAP, one of the world's leading here business software providers. And to be quite honest with you, if somebody had introduced him or herself 10 years ago to me as a Chief Future of Work Officer, I would have been probably scratching my head, would have said, what is this title all about? Now, today, as we speak here in the year 2024, it's interesting to see that quite a few large organizations have kind of a similar role. I mean, quite a few counterparts, which I'm also exchanging regularly here, the latest and greatest about this very exciting topic. And it's fascinating to see that this topic is getting actually more exciting and more exciting every quarter, because there are so many things going on in the world. Now just the latest and greatest on Gen AI is just one example, but there's so many other things which are now accelerating also this way forward when it comes to how we will live and work in the future. So having said this, I guess I'm not telling any secrets when I'm saying that the world around us is changing truly at a breakneck speed. And while that race to the future is fueled by macro trends, such as the world getting more VUCA, you will have business model innovation, or I should rather say disruption. You have huge technological advances. You have, for example, the pandemic that was just hitting us some time ago. But with all of these things going on at the same time, needless to say that other macro trends like the climate change, the demographic change come on top. With all of this going on, there's one thing which is more or less staying the same, which is that the race for talent and getting the best talent in the organization is getting actually even more challenging, getting more intense, quarter by quarter, year by year. And this is, of course, something which has led SAP to the conclusion that we need to manage all of this holistically. We need to have a holistic future of work agenda as part of our overall people and culture strategy, just to make sure that we're getting this right. And of course, the future of work is a huge term. So usually we are getting the question, what do you mean by this, right? What stands behind that? And of course, and how can you manage maybe such a huge change and transformation in the right way? Because we have now here a lot of senior change leaders also here in the audience, just to make sure that we get this right. And it's interesting, if you do the double click, usually what helps is also to take a look at where you're coming from, where you're currently at, and where you want to go. And when we talk about the future of work at SAP, we usually think along various time horizons. And the first time horizon, right, this is something that we are all very familiar with. This was kind of more or less the year 2020 when the pandemic hit all of us. And yeah, we were kind of actually doing in organizations what you need to do. You need to keep your people safe. So at SAP, we asked our folks to more or less work remotely. Within 48 hours, we asked the entire workforce to come up with their respective setup. And it was great to see that this was working. And I know that in many other organizations, this was more or less happening the same way. And I think kudos to everyone who has been managing this in such a successful fashion. But to be honest with you, this was not future of work yet. This was crisis management. This was emergency management, right? So I think we were trying to do our best. And it was kind of a live experiment. And I think we all did a very good job. And then once we had asked our folks, right, to work more or less remotely for some time, once the pandemic was kind of over and we got things again under control, many organizations, including also SAP, asked our people to come back in kind of a hybrid working mode. Sometimes this was called back to office. Sometimes this was called hybrid work, getting it right. No matter how you were calling it, this was sometimes not an easy undertaking. It was a substantial change because people were used now to something different. And it was not easy to manage this in a successful way. And at SAP, we're coming up with a specific concept. Happy to also share this in a minute. It was called our Global Pledge to Flex, and this has actually worked out quite well, but it was not an easy undertaking and was a substantial change effort that was required there. But again, this was actually not future of work yet. This was kind of more or less flex work, and flex work is a key part of maybe new working models, but it's certainly not the full future of work spectrum or more or less scope. As we speak, in the year 2024, now we are kind of evolving into what we call a kind of a new normal, where we are having now also the opportunities that come with AI. And we'll talk about this in a little more detail in a minute. But this is from our perspective where the fun part starts. This is where we think about now the future of work. And yes, flex work is an integral part of it. And yes, I think there are other key components, but now I think we're getting real. While we are getting real, I know that many people are still very much looking into how to get flex work right. So therefore, let me share maybe a few thoughts about this for a minute. What we feel is important if you manage such a transition also into a successful flex work model. And what we have learned also in our own organization, how to manage such a transformational change successfully. And what you see here is actually to get us grounded on the same more or less page is that spectrum of flex work models that you can think of. And at SAP, when we had that discussion, also at the very beginning, we saw, yes, there's a couple of options if you would like to come up with a flex work model. And what you see here is this kind of continuum of various flex work approaches. On the very left, you see a flex work model where everything is completely free floating. Everyone is simply doing what he or she wants. Some may call it anarchy, others may call it paradise. I leave it up to you. This is usually something which very often works well in a startup environment. For us, this was not the right model. If you take a look at the other end of the spectrum, you see something which is very tightly managed. And this makes total sense. So please don't understand this in a disrespectful way. There are various business models and environments where you need to have a very strong governance around this. Just think of areas where you have a strong compliance, where you need to have a particular attendance also on various occasions. Makes total sense if you have this very tightly managed, just to make sure everything works out well. For us in our business model, this was also not the right approach. We kind of landed in the middle, if you will, in a model where we say this is empowerment along business requirements. And this is because we feel at SAP that on one hand, yes, of course, business is front and center, and you need to keep in mind what is required from a business perspective. At the same time, we trust our people and that we know within certain guardrails that empowerment is key to be successful and to manage this in the right way. And we also know that, not one size doesn't fit all. If you have people who are working rather in the sales team, I would hope and trust that they're rather with the customer versus being in the office or somewhere else. And of course, if you're working rather in the R&D world, maybe it might make more sense to be also together and to work on things in a collaborative way, maybe also in the office on a regular basis. So therefore, one size certainly doesn't fit all. As we speak, we have managed such a change now over a certain course of time. And actually, our lessons learned are certainly going in the direction that A, one size doesn't fit all, and B, we feel that on average, these kind of 3 days per week in the office work as a pretty good practice. We also see the engagement scores also of these teams being the highest. So therefore, this is simply great also to see that happening, and we encourage this now also with various communication campaigns. And we also gave the respective executive board guidance to make sure that everyone is on the same page, acknowledging that you have various rules and different nuances, also different countries. The situation might be very different in China, Japan, the US versus, for example, Germany. And therefore, this is our global guideline, but we know that, of course, there are local policies required, considering local labor law, but in particular also maybe sometimes social partner regulations, and everything needs to be, of course, also handled in the respective local concept, also from a cultural perspective. So therefore, it's important to manage this in such a way. And so far, we're getting very good feedback. Of course, this is sometimes also an emotional topic. And in particular, if people have been used now to work in a very, very flexible way during the pandemic, you need to also course correct a little bit to make sure that this is now meaningful also for the years to come, because at the end of the day, we would like to make sure that we have happy people. At the same time, we also need to have happy customers and make sure that everything fits together in the right way. One way of managing this change in a successful way was to do this in a very data-driven way and to measure always how does the organization feel. So we have come up with a continuous listening strategy and really asked our folks on a regular basis, how are they doing? How can we best support them? How are things perceived? And we have also published some data points I'm happy to share as well here in this context, where we say, okay, how can we make hybrid work truly work? And the employee feedback was, I think, astonishingly positive in terms of that 80% said that this kind of flex work model makes SAP a more attractive employer. It was also great to see that managers and employees both actually told us that, yeah, this kind of model also increases their productivity, or at least keeps this on the same level. And last but by no means least, very important is that people also told us that such a flex work model improves their well-being. So also from a people sustainability standpoint, this is something which should not be underestimated. And we really felt that this is great to hear and great to see that our folks are very happy with that. Of course, all of that needed to be once again supported also from a change management perspective. We're coming up with a huge campaign, which was also running under the umbrella I'm in terms of I'm in the office, but also I'm in when it comes to the future of the company. And this was, I think, once again, a proof point that communication in these kind of contexts are key. They need to be managed in the right way, but also, of course, always considering local specifics and then the respective stakeholders, so that everything fits together. There's one thing which is not shown here, which is also very high on people's priority list, which is actually the way how the offices are set up if you are working then on a more regular basis again in the offices. And this is something where we at SAP and our friends and colleagues in the facility area have done an awesome job to start early on to design the right office environments, so that you can really follow an activity-based working approach to make sure that for the respective tasks, you have also the respective working environment to make sure that everything is also in place. And there's usually one concept which I feel makes this quite visible and also quite tangible, which is the concept of the so-called 4 Cs. So the first C, right, that this kind of concept should follow to make this change a success is you need to have space for collaboration. So the first C is all about collaboration, working together. You need to have the respective setup, whether this is the space for whiteboarding. You need to have also maybe a separate room where you can meet and have the right working session and working style. You can document things, the right tech equipment, and so on and so forth. So needless to say, if people are coming to the office on a regular basis, there need to be the right setup for collaboration. The second C is communication. If you are in the office, you should have the right environment also to communicate on a one-to-one basis, on a one-to-many basis. You should have the right setup, where you see here also on that visual, which is, by the way, not a stock photo. This is a real office of us, where you can really meet and sit together and exchange thoughts and brainstorm. So this kind of communication and mingling is certainly key. The third C is community building. So you need to have also a lot of open and wide space if you would like to have kind of a town hall meeting, or for example, you need to have huge coffee corners and all of that, and also the right canteen setup, just to make sure that there is this space where you can come together as a group, as a larger group, and have that community building, in particular after these times also of the pandemic, more important than ever. And last but by no means least, if you think about the fourth C, it's all about also concentration. So there might be still the need to have some focus work and space where you really need to sit down right on your own and do some focus work. And therefore, also spots where you can more or less be on your own, have quiet space, make sure you can focus and concentrate, is also not to be underestimated, right? And therefore, basically all of these elements come together, and we feel when you set this up, you can set up your office also here for success in these times of change, and making sure people also have the office as kind of a destination and not just as an obligation. But I mentioned this at the beginning, flex work has been one very important point on our way to the future of work, but it's certainly just one component. And therefore, let me share with you, when we think about the future of work beyond flex work, what is in our minds. When we think about the transformation of all of our organizations towards that future of work, we feel that there are basically 3 dimensions that need to be considered. And the first dimension is here the future of workforce. So if I'm closing my eyes and thinking 5 or 10 years down the road, what does the workforce of our company look like in a couple of years? What is this kind of strategic target picture that we will have for our workforce? How many permanent employees do we have? How many gig workers will we have? How many robots and how much AI will we have on the team? Right? Just think about the team composition in a few years from now, and the clearer we are right now with the target picture, what we are currently also calling this kind of more or less renaissance of the strategic workforce planning element. This is key because you can only manage change towards the North Star. You need to have that North Star to make sure that you know where you're going. And therefore, this is right now a key for many organizations, including ourselves, to get your heads around this target picture, because then a lot of things will be much easier. Having said this, if you have this target picture, you can think about the future of your people and workplace practices. And this means, on one hand, for this new workforce composition that you will have, maybe with many new organizations and generations, right, coming under your new roof, you need to bring your bread and butter business of HR to the next level, right? How do you recruit for this new workforce? How do you train? How do you incentivize? All of these things need to be now brought to the next level for the years to come, considering that you may have new generations as part of that new workforce, because here maybe Gen Z will have completely different expectations towards your workplace versus maybe the baby boomers, which are maybe still part of your workforce here and there. So there's a huge spectrum that need to be considered, and here you need to future-proof your people practices, making sure that you have the right HR strategy in place. And besides these bread and butter topics for HR that need to be evolved, there are also new and emerging topics. And this is certainly something which is fascinating. Flex work is a great example, but also the whole notion around health, safety, and well-being, particularly mental health, is becoming more and more important in these times of unprecedented change. And these are also topics that need to be managed as part of your people practice portfolio. As a fun fact, we have at SAP a dedicated mindfulness practice as part of our global health organization. And it's simply great to see that there are so many folks who have so much interest nowadays in these topics. We have a long waiting list. During the pandemic, people had time to think about their purpose, about their job, what they would like to do. And there's so much appetite. It's great that you can support this as an employer, but this requires focus, resources, and also the right mindset that one is taking care of its employees in the right way. And then the third dimension, last but by no means least, if you have your future of workforce target picture right, and if you know what your future of people practice should be, you also got to think about the future of your own HR function. We all know that our HR departments have done a great job over the last couple of years, also managing here the pandemic and bringing things to the next level. But now, for the next couple of years, I think, the HR function certainly also will need to evolve. And this means, of course, our digital backbone, right? Because all of this will only be feasible with tech, and AI will be a key element of this, and we'll come to this in more detail in a minute. But at the same time, next to tech, next to more digital HR, it's also about the skill evolution in the HR teams. We also need to evolve as HR practitioners. I'm a very passionate HR practitioner, need to evolve our own skill sets. In the past, we have done a great job of coming up with a talent strategy for the business. Moving forward, it will be equally important to also have a talent strategy for HR. And this means that you need to think about digital HR. Same is true for data-driven HR or agile HR or experience management in HR. These kind of cross skills will be so important to bring all of this to the next level and make that real. And no worries, if I'm talking about digital HR, this doesn't mean that as an HR practitioner, you will need to be able to code software moving forward. It's rather that you are able to leverage the systems, that you know where to find the data, and make sure that also as a data-driven HR function to educate the business how to leverage systems, knowing where to find the data, making sure that you can visualize data, and also tell the story around data when you are talking with your CEOs or your top management about what needs to be decided based on facts and figures and not just anecdotal stuff. So this is, I think, a huge opportunity to professionalize our domain and bring things to the next level, and thereby preparing our organizations for the future. And when we talk about the future of the HR function, and when we talk about AI, currently this is probably something which is a huge game changer, as we all know. And while AI has indeed long been now the talk of the town, it's interesting and fascinating to see that Gen AI is currently probably the silver bullet that will help us here on many fronts, because it's simply an accelerator to reinvent and reimagine also how we do HR. And on a very high level, of course, you can cut the cake here into two pieces. And this is on one hand, the whole arena of transactional HR, where you can change the game on the operational excellence side. Just imagine your shared service centers in all of the other transactional activities which you have. You can certainly provide a lot of services now in a much faster way. You can have AI create text, do an analysis in the background. Just imagine if you have an employee engagement survey, you have 20,000 comments, and then usually this takes you maybe 2 weeks to analyze these comments. With AI, you have done this in minutes, right? For example, much faster. You can save a lot of resources that can be at the same time then allocated to other topics which are a little bit more value add, particularly on the strategic HR side, to come to the second piece. And here you can now, with the help of AI, truly make our employee experience aspirations a reality. Because we all know that sometimes, doing HR work, if you're not doing this on a daily basis, can be somehow time consuming. Just imagine if you need to do now all of a sudden a job description, if you need to create things that you're only doing once in a while. Now, with the help of AI, and here as SAP, of course, please bear with me, we are also offering a lot of opportunities in this context, where you can simply leverage the software to come up with your co-pilot who will simply help you. And the co-pilot in SAP HCM is called Joule. You can have here then your co-pilot help you with the right things and being much faster. And this kind of job description, automational elements are, of course, just very nice examples which are very practical, because if you can do this now much faster versus taking hours to think about this, versus simply getting already a few nice proposals, more or less based on your fingertips. So this is just a practical example, what is currently doable, and there are so many other use cases which are currently evaluated, but making sure that everything is relevant, reliable, is of course simply awesome when you think about AI, because it will make your life much easier in the AI space. Of course, always being responsible also when it comes to AI ethics and everything that you can think of, that's a no-brainer. But in essence, this is probably the silver bullet that we have been all looking for when it comes to being a little bit more efficient, freeing up resources, at the same time having then your hands free for doing some more HR work with a human touch, right? Bring the H back into HR, making sure that you have your hands free also for personal consulting, if people have a concern, and take your time and work with the employees and managers as an HR function to be of best support whenever things are maybe a little bit tricky. And having said this, I think it's important to see that there's a lot of stuff going on as we speak, and AI is obviously changing the game. At the same time, we should not forget why we are all doing this. And we are doing this certainly also getting the future of work right, because we feel in the end, it all comes down to getting the future of talent right. Because we are doing this as organizations to be an attractive employer of choice. Given the labor market demographics and seeing all the skill shortages, we need to make sure that we have a good understanding of the future of talent. And we need to make sure that we as organizations get that change towards becoming a super attractive employer right. And this is not an easy one in these times of unprecedented change, but understanding what your current workforce, but also future applicants need from an employer is of utmost importance. And then, of course, you can manage your target picture, you can manage your people practice, and you can manage the evolution of the HR function accordingly. But in the end, it all comes down to getting the future of talent right if you would like to be a successful organization moving forward. And while there are so many questions these days, right, what is important for talents? What is important for current employees, but also future applicants and candidates? We usually share our perspective, and this is based on a lot of analysis and data points. And yes, of course, we have a huge workforce globally active. And therefore, it's interesting to see that things have evolved over time. And we feel that getting the future of talent right certainly requires a laser focus also on a people-centric approach. And what you can see here is kind of more or less a hierarchy, or how things have evolved over the last couple of years. If you start at the bottom, here you see that quite a few characteristics or things were kind of front and center for many employees and also candidates when they were interested in joining an organization, where you felt, yes, having a competitive salary, offering great career growth, or offering a nice working environment were kind of a a given. And of course, everyone wants to work for a nice company brand. That's for sure. But today, this is kind of a must-have, right? I mean, you can't really differentiate any longer with that. And what we have seen now also through the pandemic and over recent years is that things are becoming more important, like, for example, the fit to your personal purpose. So if a candidate is looking for a new employer, yes, the candidate is certainly doing a check, but what are the company values? Is there a fit to the individual values? And is there maybe also the respective and right level of consideration of ESG requirements? Is there, for example, a company that is also conscious of environmental implications? Is there also maybe a particular value in the company, right, that you would like to be kind of an active contributor to more or less the right level of democracy in a couple of countries and all of that. So therefore, there are quite a few factors that need to be carefully evaluated when you're joining a company. And this is something we are seeing from many candidates and also from the current workforce, that this is becoming more and more important. Same is true also for the whole notion of flex work. I think a lot of people these days are looking for employers who are offering flex work opportunities, whether this is a full remote opportunity or rather kind of the right level of hybrid work. This depends certainly on the industry and the company. And another thing that has become also, I think in the meantime, kind of a prerequisite for many to join an organization is that the employer focuses also on the right health and well-being environment, making sure that, yes, the employer certainly also cares for you, making sure that, these things are certainly also considered in your employer value proposition. And now, as we speak in the year 2024, what we are observing is that all of these things which I just shared are important, but they are sometimes not even sufficient anymore if you really would like to differentiate. And what we are seeing are basically two things which seem to be spot on for many if they would really like to make the choice for the right employer. And these two elements are on one hand personalized benefits. So benefits have been always important, but if you have benefits that are really hitting the mark for yourself, that are really matching your personal life situation. If you are somewhat younger, if you are, for example, looking more or less also how to best support your family, this will be completely different benefits that you're looking for versus if you're close to retirement. And it's completely different if you are, for example, working in China, for example, also with the whole social security system there. And if you would like to buy some property, completely different benefits that are important for you versus, for example, in the US or Germany. So therefore, if you're offering this kind of flexibility to personalize these things, this is something where a lot of employers currently can successfully differentiate. And the second element, which is currently top of mind for many candidates as part of their also here selection process for the right employer, is the whole arena of skills development. So if I join a company, will there be the right opportunities for me to evolve my skills? Right now in the time of AI, will I be able to learn more about AI? If I'm working in the tech industry, will I have exposure to, for example, cybersecurity elements? Can I more or less acquire these skills there? And that's fascinating because on one hand, yes, for example, in our world, this is something which is, of course, kind of a no-brainer because as an IT company like SAP, you can do that. At the same time, not everyone can work in the cybersecurity department. So therefore, you need to offer flex opportunities, how to maybe work on projects, that you can have fellowships where you're offering these kind of things in a much more meaningful way, that a lot of people have the chance to acquire these new skills. At the same time, you're keeping also your skill base current. So therefore, this is an integral part of being an attractive employer and where you can really differentiate. And yes, this is, of course, sometimes easier said than done, but that whole notion of being much more flexible, so from kind of hardwired jobs to now a little bit more skill-focused working environment is certainly the way to go. And with all of this happening, I think it's fair to say that truly exciting times for everyone in the business, truly exciting times also for everyone who is driving that change, and certainly truly exciting times also to be in HR, because there's something where you can now really make a difference while connecting people and technology. And of course, all of this is huge change. And therefore, what we have seen and what we have learned is that here the various mantras and key levers of make a transformation a success seem to be more relevant than ever. And of course, sometimes these things are very straightforward, but the execution is where the rubber meets the road. It's about leaders, right? Who are really seeing this and aligning the organization around that vision. It's about engaging the organization, having a two-way dialogue, making sure that you are also listening to the organization and getting then the right also stakeholders behind your concept. You can't over communicate. At the same time, there needs to be consistent messaging. You need to make sure that this is coming also through the respective channels, that everyone is really reached with that information. And of course, at the end of the day, if there's a change, people need to be equipped. So training is of utmost importance, and this means also practical knowledge, not just theoretical PowerPoints. It needs to be practical knowledge, how maybe that new way of working or whatever your change is all about is certainly factored in. And at the end of the day, you need to measure what you do, because otherwise you can't steer. And this also means that you need to collect the data, see if things work. If yes, great, celebrate. If not, you need to course correct if needed. And this is, I think, on one hand, the bread and butter also scope of good change management. At the same time, in these times where things are so complex and so many things are happening at the same time, it's more important than ever to keep this on the radar screen, making sure that the laser focus is there for maximum success. And therefore, I couldn't be more excited about the future. And who knows, maybe we will have another session in a couple of years from now, and then we can look back and see, okay, how all of these things have worked out. And therefore, I couldn't be more excited to see you in the future. And looking forward to make this a success. Thank you.
Thank you, Christian. That was really, really interesting. Thank you for that. I think one of the things while you were talking through the 4 C's and had that amazing picture of the office, which I think made us all very jealous, was I think we all sometimes neglect the physical aspect of change and how much the physical environment can support us with whatever change we're going through, right? So I think you laying out the 4 C's was very helpful in sort of shaping that. We have had a few questions come through, and quite a lot of them are about AI. So I might take those as we dive deeper into the AI bit of the conversation. But actually, we've just had a question come through from Karen, who says, we're struggling on getting people back to the office even 3 days a week. Do you have any carrot rather than stick suggestions that have worked for you? So I know you sort of touched on a few things there, but would you be able to give us a few more insights into how you did manage to successfully get everybody along on the sort of hybrid model that you talked about?
I think 3 things come to my mind. The first one is, this is certainly something that needs to be also incentivized in the right way. So if you're coming also to the office, this should not be just an obligation, but the office needs to be a destination. So that kind of also physical space environment, and Nick, you just touched upon this, should not be underestimated. So the good news is this is actually not rocket science. The bad news is this takes time and money. So therefore, they need to have a plan, and to bring this into then also here execution is something that needs to be also managed along a timeline. So that's one. The second thing that comes to my mind is certainly leaders' role modeling. So I think if leaders are in the office and if they're also having meetings there and making sure that the meetings are also meaningful, and also then showcasing how this could be done and done also in a successful fashion, this is certainly something which is super helpful as well. And last but by no means least, the third component which has helped us big time is a concept which we call MOTOs, moments that matter on site together, where we have collected across the globe, across many countries, these moments where it really makes sense to have meaningful time together in the office. And this can be everything. This can be for maybe our software developers have a joint design thinking session in the office because this is the way how they work. Or this is, for example, maybe in Japan, the way how that you meet after more or less regular working hours for maybe having a good time with the team, right? And maybe even having a kind of a drink together, whatever. So these kind of things, depending on the cultural context, can be very meaningful. And if they are shared as a best practice, also in kind of an internal platform and best practice sharing approach. This has helped us big time.
Brilliant, thank you. A follow-up question to that from Heather. There is different research and opinions on the number of days that are required to engage the workforce in a hybrid balance. Do you have advice on how to go about determining what's right for your organization, for the organization?
Well,
How do you work best?
I think this is indeed, from my perspective, also spot on. Everything should follow here, not just anecdotal feedback, but really a data-driven approach. And this data-driven approach gives you certainly also a way what works best in the respective business model, because I'm a huge advocate that you need to consider the organizational context. Different industries, different organizations, different cultures will require completely different settings. So therefore, it's not one size fits all. And whether it's 2 days, whether it's 3 days, it's whatever days, it should not just be about the number of days, it should be also what works best for the business. And at the end of the day, people need to be engaged. At the same time, I have a hard time to believe that a fully remote workforce can be as successful as maybe a hybrid workforce.
Yeah, that human connection part is, I think, fundamental. We've also had a follow-up question from Casey regarding, I think, to your point about the two-way dialogue. And he says, I would love to hear how everybody goes about generating two-way dialogue in their organization. So I think you mentioned that in one of your, maybe in your final slide, Christian. Can you talk a bit about how you went about fostering that two-way dialogue?
Absolutely. I think on one hand, two-way dialogue needs to happen on various channels, I feel. And of course, one way of dialogue can be also, for example, a regular and continuous listening approach, where you also ask, maybe even in through various feedback channels, whether this is through small pulse service or whatever, simply collecting the information from the organization, and not just, for example, coming up with top-down information, but also then having the respective feedback channels. And this, of course, is something where also in our all-hands meeting, people can ask questions. There will be executive panels where you can get responses. I think it's also about more or less making sure that you have a lot of open dialogue formats and forums. If our leaders travel the world, there will be always opportunities for coffee corner sessions to make sure that you get also a feeling firsthand, right, how things are working. And we feel that in particular here, surveys are a key way of continuous two-way dialogue, because this is where you get in a systematic way facts and figures to make sure that you know how you're doing.
Thank you. Right, I see we've not got another question about AI that's just come through, so I think we should probably dive into that side of the conversation. So thank you. So I wanted to sort of kick off by asking if you could please share your thoughts on the overall impact that AI is going to have on the future of work. You sort of talked a bit about the HR piece in your presentation, but can you talk a little bit about sort of how you see it overall impacting the workforce and the future of work?
Absolutely. And what is fascinating right now, you can't open a website or magazine without also reading maybe a few thoughts, opinions, how maybe AI will impact the workforce. And on one hand, it's too early to tell because we're just scratching the surface. At the same time, it's also clear that the future of work is not science fiction anymore. And AI will certainly change the way how we will live and work in the future big time. I think what I feel is important to understand that this is a once in a generation opportunity in my perspective, where we can drive improvements on productivity, on decision making, on workflow automation, on having better data. And this is simply fascinating. So therefore, there are kind of unprecedented opportunities for personalization, for tasks, workflows, and personal development can be tailored and much more customized to the individual. And I think when you put this into perspective, we need to understand that this is probably one of the biggest changes and transformational elements that we have seen for decades, even maybe longer than that. And of course, this will heavily depend on the business and the industry in which you're operating. I mean, just in the case of IT, this is on one hand, of course, evolving the product landscape of IT companies. At the same time, it's also changing the way how maybe software is created. At the end of the day, ChatGPT can code software to a certain extent, right? So this is simply fundamentally changing how maybe also software will develop moving forward in the way that, yeah, I think folks can rather focus on higher value add activities, on oversight versus maybe basic things, transactional things can be automated, put forward. And that's, of course, just an example that would be then applicable to many other industries. And this is fascinating to see. So therefore, I think it's going to be a huge game changer. At the same time, we also need to make sure that this is handled in the right way. I think for organizations, it's important to understand, to acknowledge that this topic is crucial. And I think it's also important to have the right mindset on the management level to manage such a topic holistically. Whether this is having a dedicated organization in place that will drive that change, a transformation office. And of course, you need to tackle this thing holistically. There are so many things that come together. You can't manage this in isolation. And as individuals, I feel when you think about that evolution, it's so important that, we understand also that we need to take care of our own development in this context. We need to learn. We need to bring kind of a lot of curiosity with us. There needs to be growth mindset. I think that's the only way how we can keep up with everything that's changing. And of course, we also need to still understand where am I good at, right? How we can prepare ourselves. So what is maybe my distinctive skill set where I can add a lot of value, because a lot of support will be provided, but what is maybe also that domain expertise where I can be a key contributor moving forward. And I think that whole skills development on a professional skills level, but also maybe on the soft skills side, how we can still work together with others is key. While the machine may support us and augment many things moving forward, and there will be still a lot of problems that will require non-linear creativity where we need to work together as a team, sometimes internationally. So this kind of problem solving together as a team will become more and more important. So I think this emerging landscape is exciting, but we also need to understand that this will not come on its own, and we need to take care of this. We need to try to shape it, but also be self-responsible and prepare ourselves for the future.
I have a couple of follow-up questions that are coming from the audience, actually. So we've got a question from Lily who says, my executive team are very cautious, to an extent petrified of AI. They've already put out numerous mandates to the entire organization, which limit the opportunity for teams to experiment with it. Do you have any practical tips on how to convince them that we need to be more open to the possibilities it may offer us?
Well, I'm not, of course, aware in which industry and which particular setting you're operating, but I feel personally that the more practical one can show also more or less the benefits in a very tangible way, I think the more convincing these things can be. Just to give you an example, in my own organization, and of course in the future work organization, when you have around about 200 people who are really more or less also excited about the future, we had an AI learning day, right? We had, for example, one day where we dedicated time to more or less upskill ourselves in a peer learning fashion. And when we were preparing the agenda, we were asking also AI to make us an agenda proposal, and we had an avatar when it's doing the opening of that day. And if you see what's possible already there and how good the quality is for that, it will be very convincing very soon. And I think I can only imagine if one is able to show these tangible examples, what this could look like maybe in your particular business environment, then maybe also top management will be hopefully convinced very soon that this is an opportunity. At the same time, I absolutely appreciate also maybe some hesitation. It needs to be managed in the right way. You can't let it go. There is a lot of effort also required to more or less get the right infrastructure in place, have the right security in place, making sure the right guardrails also when it comes from ethical considerations need to be put into consideration as well. Certainly holistically managed is a no-brainer, but as you say, a lot of benefits if you're understanding it.
Yeah, agreed. So as we head towards a future where AI becomes integral to the work culture, how do you think we can support and guide our workforce through the transition while making sure that it's both safe and effective? Because I'm conscious that obviously the safety side of things, is a major concern. So how do we sort of guide them to ensure that it's meets both needs, the safety side and the productivity effectiveness side of things?
Well, I personally feel that it's important to, on one hand, be clear about how you would like to apply AI. In which parts of your business would you like to use it? Is it something which is an integral part all of a sudden of your business model? Or is this rather kind of simply a tool for everyone where you can make use of it in your daily work, whatever you do, right? Whether this is writing emails, whether this is doing research, what have you. So I think there's a zillion of possible applications, but I think that's the first piece, right? If it's simply more or less a supporter, a co-pilot of you in your daily work lives, then of course this can already be a nice productivity help. At the same time, if this is now becoming an integral part of your business model, of course this can be a huge game changer. And then of course the productivity can be even calculated and should be. At the same time, I feel if you would like to make sure that everything is handled in a safe way, of course, you need to have the right infrastructure. This starts with the hardware and the software. And it also needs to be, I think, managed in a very meaningful way that you have, I think, dedicated task forces and working groups who are taking care of the organizational, also handling of this. What is the policy? That there should be a policy in place, and what is maybe also a best practice in learning. So therefore, this whole understanding, what is the vision? How do you more or less enable this also with various measures, but then also how do you provide training on these things is probably key to success. Particular training and enablement will make this change a success, or it will make it a failure. So therefore, I can't underline this topic enough. I feel from my perspective, if you want to manage this change, it needs to be managed in a meaningful way and also with the right resources. Otherwise, I think this is quite tricky and rather set up for failure.
And what are your thoughts on how to approach that within a multi-generational team or workforce? You know, when you've got lots of different generations and you might have Gen Z chomping at the bit to learn everything they possibly can about AI, but on the other hand, those that, you know, are more resistant to it.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, it's great that you are pointing this out also with different generations. I'm actually somebody who has seen that it's not always actually dependent so much on your age or on your generational background, whether you're excited about this or not. I see a lot of more senior people who are also very excited about this, and because they have the context and they know how they could apply this. So therefore, it's fascinating to see that. But anyway, I think it's important that, yes, one is considering that maybe if there are different generations or different backgrounds who are a little bit more tech savvy, if you can come up with kind of cross and peer learning elements where the organizational members are kind of more or less teaching each other, everyone is becoming a teacher and everyone is becoming a learner. I think this culture, this can be embedded, whether you call it sometimes reverse mentoring or whether you call it kind of peer learning, it doesn't matter. But I think to create that openness and make sure that there is also this mindset available, this can be simply a huge differentiator. And I feel, yes, it's simply fair and needs to be respected and acknowledged that there are different also generations, different backgrounds who will maybe simply approach things differently. That's perfectly fine. But at the end of the day, it's important that one is one team and one is trying to bring this here into a successful manner forward. And therefore, it's all about learning these things together in a meaningful way.
And on that, we've got a question from the audience. What are your thoughts about goals around future employees having a role in training AI within the company as part of their role to improve the work environment? Where do you see that fitting in?
Well, I mean, if you have new joiners, right, who have been maybe even hired because of their skill sets, it's simply great that they can make a huge contribution. I mean, if you are having then all of a sudden AI pros or tech-savvy folks on your team, I mean, if they can be role models or I don't know, also here part of any kind of training, the trainer concepts that they can multiply the language, I think this is super appreciated, I feel. This is something where they can make a huge difference. In addition to that, I think it's at the same time important that there are not so many people out there who have already seen everything because the topic is so new. So therefore, it's rather about everyone, no matter whether you're joining a new organization or whether you're already in an organization, there is the need to learn and to grow. And I think therefore it's rather about the mindset and about the opportunity for everyone to get these skills somehow, versus, for example, simply looking for new people joining the organization.
And then just one more on the sort of training side of it, and yeah, getting the sort of the people to embrace it. There's a question from John who says, have you focused on one particular team or business unit when looking at the possibilities that AI can offer? Obviously, you mentioned HR, but as an organization, have you been focusing on specific teams, or has it been across the board?
Well, I mean, it's interesting. In general, I would say that, particularly also in our industry, I think more or less all teams and all functions are in scope, because there's so much opportunity seen, and that's for sure. And there will be use cases, whether you are in sales, whether you are in software development, whether you're in HR or finance, doesn't matter actually, or in marketing. There will be a lot of use cases everywhere. At the same time, you can't do it all at the same time. So if you would like to start somewhere, you need to maybe come up with pilots. And of course, yeah, in this context, I mean, in IT industry, of course, software development will be certainly using this right from day one. Now, of course, in the HR space, there's also a lot of opportunity. Just think of, for example, shared service center environments where you have a lot of tickets to be managed, or yeah, in other areas where also leveraging now standard software like SAP HCM, there are a lot of use cases available where you can also simply leverage what is there. And this, of course, means automation, means, for example, the classic topic in recruiting is creating job descriptions, making sure that you get automated also employee feedback and candidate feedback out there, and manager feedback. So I think these are the classic use cases, but you need to probably know where to start in your industry, in your company, where you get maybe the biggest bang for the buck right away as kind of a pilot, so that you also create maybe excitement and can also reap the fruits early on in the process. I don't want to call it quick wins, but I think in every change you will see where you have probably maybe a few good examples right away early in the process.
Brilliant. I'm conscious of time, so I'm going to sort of ask you a wrap-up question in a way. So obviously we've talked about AI's promising potential in reshaping work procedures, and I'm hoping sort of that this sort of in some way will answer Yash's question as well. But what are the things about the way we work that you don't see changing despite the impact of AI? What's not going to change?
Well, I think we're all aware that in today's business world, of course, there are a few basic fundamentals that will not change. And this means that at the end of the day, you're trying to create value for your customers. And if you're trying to do this, you need to make sure that your business model is having this as a North Star. And then everything else, of course, will to a certain extent follow. You need to have the right technology in place. Most importantly, of course, having the right people in the door and keeping them in the door, and making sure that, of course, you have the right strategy and everyone understands the right strategy and is rallying behind this in a very simple fashion. And of course, all these kind of business imperatives and fundamentals will not change from my perspective. And at the same time, I think what has always been the case, if there are huge changes and transformations happening, yeah, you can either fear it or you can try to embrace it and make the best out of it. And therefore, this kind of growth mindset and that openness to change, and sometimes we all know that this is not an easy one, can make, of course, everything a success. And therefore, I can only encourage everyone to see this right now with all its challenges and with all its constraints as a huge opportunity, being now somebody who is driving change, being somebody who is maybe in the HR space and trying to make your workforce future ready, or being a business leader who would like to make your organization a business future ready. This is a once in a generation opportunity. And I'm simply excited that this is now happening, and yeah, very much looking forward to be part of it.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much, Christian. I think the sort of underlying theme of it all is that people are still absolutely key, and it's important to get that right in every way, even if, you know, we are consistently talking about AI. We can't forget that you need the humans to actually make the AI work. So thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for all your insights and everything that you've shared today. For those of you watching from wherever you may be, we'll also be sharing this with all of our members and anyone who missed it. So you'll be able to find the recording, but also we'll be turning this into a podcast and making it part of this podcast series that we'll be launching. We'll pop the link in to ECLC in the chat now. So, because I know there are a few people who aren't members yet who may be interested in joining, so please do so. I think the link to Christian's LinkedIn profile is on the screen now if you want to connect with him. More information about Tiger Hall can be found at tigerhall.com. And thank you everybody for joining. Thank you for all your questions. It was a very interactive conversation, so I really appreciate all of your input. And Christian, thank you so much for joining us. A pleasure as always. Thank you for all your interesting insights. It was great. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye-bye.